Howdy legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you are having a fantastic week. Now, you've likely noticed that I've missed a couple of days, and that is because it is a very, very long flight and a large time change between Australia and America. Now, currently I am in Dallas, Texas, but I'll be traveling around a little bit. I'm over here with my partner, mostly for a holiday that lined up perfectly for a dear friend's wedding. So I will still be doing my updates, and I will endeavour to keep the same quality of content and footage as I normally do. But if I miss a couple of days here or there, or some of the videos are shorter, I apologise in advance. But I'm looking very much forward to travelling around with my partner and having a little bit of time off. These videos take a lot longer than I think a lot of people actually realise. Now, legends, of course, as always, we have a lot to go over. So we're going to look at a couple of big bangs that have happened, a couple of strikes against ammo, as well as some weapons being used. We need to look at maps. Of course, I've missed a number of days, and we do have the early days of July. Now, what I said, and you know, this was speculation, but I said I think some of the maps are waiting to tick into another month to not show those kilometre squares for June. I may have been correct. Maybe. We'll see. I'll show you on the maps. I want to talk about the US halting military aid to Ukraine, what that will mean, what that may look like, and why is this? Is it a political play? Because we know today that Trump and Putin have spoken. Time zones helps a lot. Now, and then to extend on that, we're going to go over a full military political update of what is happening, Europe, Ukraine, Russia, America, and the reality and how the narrative is cracking, people starting, I guess, to maybe see the light on that. So let's start with some of these big bangs, some of these strikes that have occurred. Now, as you are likely aware, I don't report on just everything going bang because I'm more focused on what makes strategic difference. And as I say, the best way to actually assess the battlefield damage of anything like this is give it time. And okay, we saw that huge explosion probably 6 months back now at some of the Russian dumps. Now, have we seen a huge impact on frontline munitions from that? Not really, and that is how we assess things strategically. But I'll show the footage as it is big of the day. Now, this was near Donetsk. Now, this is a Russian ammo dump that has gone up in a spectacular fashion. A very large shock wave, of course, coming off this too. There's multiple different angles of this. But then in Zhytomyr, there's also a bit of a mystery explosion. Now, this is in Ukrainian held territory, so Ukrainian controlled territory, center west of the country. We see this huge explosion here. Now, it's being reported that this was a petrol station. In my opinion, that doesn't seem to be that way, especially in some of the other footage, this shock wave that comes off this. So we may have seen another strike as well. So we have large bang in Russia from missiles. We saw a large Russian aerial attack and a large one in Ukraine as well. A bit of a mystery at this point. Now, in Poltava, we have a recruitment center has been struck by Russian drones. And this was the footage I wanted to show you here. You can see the Garan 2 drone coming in and striking after a second one at this point. Now, what I have been speaking about for some time was as we see the Garans in more and more quantity, we will start seeing them used more tactically. And we have them in Poltava, we have them in Kramatorsk, we've had them in Kyiv, we've had them in everywhere. So we're seeing them used long distance and short distance as well. And there has been casualties reported from this. So let's step out, let's have a look at the maps. And we do have a couple of major changes to show you. So we'll zoom back out on here. And of course, here is Ukraine, the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, before we go into the red check, which indicates Russian movement, I have an update on this for you of the kilometre squares. Now, as I say, the way you present data is as important as the data itself, and I try and present as much of that as possible to give you the best idea, okay? So let's have a look here. We show 2025 because this can show momentum on the front line. We show back in 2024 to give similar numbers to this time last year to indicate how things are moving 12 months apart, similar conditions, blah, blah, blah. So we have the last day of Deep State for June had been updated. So we came to a conclusion of 556 kilometre squares, which of course is another 115 more than the month prior, but over 5 times than June, the year prior. And then we have Syriac too. Now Syriac has come to 572. So what I'm saying is this number is very, very close. Have a look at then May, and then we can see these are very close. So we know it's right around that. And to July 3, we've already had 55 because I think there has been some waiting to step into July, and I think we'll see July be a record month because I think there's multiple axes at the moment that are going to then basically work on each other, and then we'll see large territorial advancement come from the exploitation of this. So of course we are about 3 days behind. So let's zoom in on the map. We are on July the 1st at the moment. I'll show you this, then we'll compare the Syriac and some geolocations too. And as you can see, already very large red check. So let's go into Toretsk. Now, Toretsk, keep that in the forefront of your mind, as well as that Garan strike too. Those are going to become relevant for our military political discussion. So Delivkia all the way up into this Delivkia up here, Dashne, coming under Russian control, and this is what I've said about this is 4 kilometers. Axes are going to start working on each other mutually, exclusively, and then we'll see large kilometer squares changes. 56 already in this month, 3 days in. Then we have on the Pokrovsk eastern front, some say 4.3 kilometers, likely more. That's the minimum of what that is to Razine, and then Pokrovsk actual. We have Uspanivki on the western flank being made, Novoserhivki. This is still behind. Remember, I showed you a geolocation in Novomykolaiivki right in here, but it is moving in that right direction. Velika Novosilka front, we have Berlatske front. This will probably be about 2.5 kilometers in here. Oh, sorry, 3.5 kilometers in here. Komar, now in my opinion, this is another example of where we're going to see different axes meet. We're going to see from Pidubne, Zerka down to Komar, and this whole bit fill in here, likely during this month as well, down around here. So that is our first update. Don't worry, we're going to step onto the map, so I just want to get up to then the relevant days. So then let's come right down into the south, and of course we have Kamyanske in here. Now there are geolocations showing this as well. So Kamyanske on the 2nd, we had Russian advancement, so we do know they are pushing in the south. And then we come up, Pokrovsk, Velika front, Bahatar finally, after 4 weeks being behind, shows under Russian control. To the south of Horokove, again, all this Oleksivkia, Zelený Kut, I think this will go red this month. Novoserhivkia further. I think that's all the update we have on the 3rd, and then we come, turn this off and on again, that's how we fix everything. And then we come to today. So this is the newest map today. We have Toretsk area, Nelipivkia coming under then Russian control, and then we have Oleksivkia, Bahatar, Rozliv coming under control, further expansion out from Zerka, and then we come again to Kamyanske, more control as well. This should have been a very easy area to defend given the body of water here towards Plavne too. And this is exactly what I've said that the Russians will do. It makes sense. Again, Occam's razor theory. What makes sense is very likely you see hoof prints in the dirt. You'd think horse before zebra. And with Sumy slowing down, I don't give a shit if Sursky says there's 50,000 Russian troops up there. There's not. Trust me, we would know if there was. I think that, okay, we're being stalled. There's a lot of resistance by the Ukrainian forces in the north. Let's just push in the south. This makes sense. That's what you do if you're numerically larger. So we see that southern push, and then we come Kupiansk, some movement being made around Sinkivkia as well, up to that, I think I said 56, I deleted it, but 56, 55 kilometre squares this early in the month. So let's have a look at a couple of specific areas around the country and look at what is changing compared to Syriac maps. Now, firstly, let's come into Kursk Oblast, somewhere we don't hear about that much anymore. People would like to imagine that it never happened. Kursk, who, what, where? Never heard of her. And let's come to Thankyou. Now, about 3 weeks ago, the Russians in Thankyou were almost surrounded, but I believe the VDV and some other units in here were mobilised into here to push then the Ukrainians back, or at least stabilise it, to try and move the Russian forces and give them some relief for who were almost surrounded in here. And during the last 4 days, Russian army managed to recapture some positions east of Thankyou. Remember, this eastern push would almost cross this road, or had the road at some points, and almost cut off, or did cut off. We're not really sure, the Russian forces in the centre of Thankyou. Now, there is an area in the north a lot of people are carrying on about. I don't think it is as important as many are making out. So we have Kupiansk, and then I've got a couple of screenshots here because it makes it easier on me. We have, this is Dorichnia, Kupiansk is where my cursor is, and just up in here, we have where the Russian forces at Milove have crossed the border in a different axis. So we zoom in, and then we have Milove just here. Now, what you'll see is it is just across the border. We have a geolocation of Russian forces in here with then a national flag, unit flag as well. Now, in my opinion, everyone's making out this is going to be the next axis. I don't believe it is. This borderline, the border isn't manned. The border defences for Russia and Ukraine sit behind the line. So you will see localised crossings every now and then. We saw that Russian one maybe 2 months ago, just above Kiev. And I don't think it is I don't think that's going to develop into something new. Again, I may be eating my words here, but those small crossings of a kilometre or less, realistically, it's more of a show thing, I believe. The defensive lines don't sit right on the front. Now, let's move our way down the maps. Let's come to then the Terney front, of course, where I think this is the most critical situation happening. And I think that we're not seeing it move because Ukraine has realised this and has put a lot of forces here to try and stop further Russian advancement and exploitation of attrition, squeezing the Ukrainians in the fatal funnel that has been created. But Syriac says during the last 48 hours, the Russian army recaptured some parts of Rivkadab here and Karpivkia here that have previously been lost. Remember, he showed there was Ukrainian counterattacks in here. So he's showing that this is growing here. And the reason I talk about this is the only way to supply this whole sector is through this funnel that is about 10 kilometres, maybe 12 kilometres, but that is within drone range, barrel artillery range, FAB range, TOS, that it could create a fatal funnel in here that is the worst possible thing in a attritional nature war like this. So let's move our way down into the south and have a bit of a look. So of course we have Kamianske, we have Orokhiv, and we have Huliopol that is moving in here. Let me move that into that folder. We can delete some of these as they're just there to remind, to jog my memory, especially when I am this jet lagged. I think it's about 3 in the morning in Australia right now. And we have this. During the last 2 days, Russian army captured new positions in Kamianske. Deep State Ukrainian map linked in with Ukrainian MOD shows more advancement than the Syriac map. So Syriac map is behind in this sector. And then we come across to then Huliopol, Malanivka. We have seen all the maps confirming some Russian advancement. He's saying that the Russians have captured the rest of this locality of Malanivka. We do know there has been definitely some movement around here. Southern movements and that Goran drone, keep that in your mind for our politics part at the end of the video. Now, let's come our way across. Let's go to Torets. We're just going to bounce around a little bit. Don't worry, we'll get everywhere. So we have, during the last 7 days, Russian army entered Bilahida from the south and made small advances northeast of this mine. So small advancements just out from Torets itself. Torets actual, so in here, as well as further towards then Dilivkia as well. Again, all of this has been shown on other maps, and we do believe, given like it's right up into here, but we know if this axis is moving, there's definitely been some movement in there as well. Taking any extremes, we need both maps or a geolocation to prove it, but it's likely that front line is moving, of course, as we showed this red check there too. So then let's move into Pokrovsk. We'll move Pokrovsk east first off, where we did see those updates over the last couple of days. Let's have a look here, and we can see on this map he's saying the Ukrainian army completely recaptured the locality of Miralubivka at the beginning of June, which they launched a counterattack from. So in Miralubivka, there was a counterattack, and Ukraine has recaptured this area down into, along this Kozyeny Torets reservoir in here, so showing more movement on the Syriac for the Ukrainian forces than on the deep state map itself. So again, with everything, if a neutral or even pro map is showing something like, if a Russian advance is shown on deep state, I'm more likely to believe that than a Ukrainian advance. Same with Syriac. If Syriac shows a Ukrainian advance, I'm more likely to believe that than showing a Russian advance. It's why we use multiple maps in this. Again, second day after here, the last 3 days, Russian army reached the eastern outskirts of Rezene, right in here, as that did show, and latest advances to Mernay as well. So Rezene, and then just further down, reaching the outskirts just underneath this Mykolaiivka as well. So keep an eye on everything moving in this sector. It is moving closer and closer to Minograd, Pokrovsk. What we do know is that on the Pokrovsk western flank, this rail and road in here is within drone range, and as this becomes closer to Rezene, these other points of logistics to be able to bring in then communications as far as roads, these are going to start coming under drone control. Pokrovsk Minograd is going to be more and more costly to hold, and there is a lot of speculation around how much resource will Ukraine put into actually holding Minograd Pokrovsk. Now, Pokrovsk, actually, no, I've completed that folder. Don't worry about that. And of course, we have this large red here. We have then Velika Novosilka. We have Zerka coming under control. Rozliv finally coming under bloody control. Let's have a look here. Taking control. Shevchenko over a series of trenches in this direction, reaching the border of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So we can move down into here. Let's then line this up, and what we're looking for is then Malivkia. So we're talking right out in here. So he's saying the border has been reached out from Shevchenko in that direction, and then the second update we have for you today is just to the north of here. So we're talking this Pidubne area, Mokurali, reaching the outskirts. Again, by the grey zone on this, I'm likely to say there's definitely Russian presence in Pidubne. Again, we're not sure the actual exploit of this, but we do know that this is closing up, and that these axes that were really 3 axes at one point, we had the Velika, we had Zeleny Pole, we had Pokrovsk, and actually I'll say 4. Then we had the, what did I used to call it? The Kursk front too. This is meeting, and that's why I think we'll see those axes then exploit into much larger territorial gains in the coming weeks. Now, the biggest news that has happened while I've been off is the Pentagon halting then support to Ukraine. Not all support, a lot still going through, but we see an article like this, Pentagon halting some promised munitions for Ukraine. Has halted shipments of some air defence missiles and other precision munitions to Ukraine due to worries that US stockpiles have fallen too low. Now, this was driven by the Pentagon's policy chief, Elbridge Colby, and was made after a review of Pentagon munition stockpiles, leading to concerns that the total number of arty rounds, air defence missiles and precision munitions was sinking. Now, what I will say in this, the most important ones is the Patriots, the HIMARS, the 155 arty, the barrel, and AIM air-to-air. That is what is being halted, and that is very, very important. The most important for frontline is 155 artillery. The second is Patriot, then HIMARS, then the air-to-air. But what I will say, this again, I think is of huge concern, and massive questions need to be asked. US, like Europe, like Australia, like many nations, has in a fairly limited war. Honestly, this war is between Ukraine and Russia, and then we had limited war between Iran and Israel. This is still limited, and the US has a shortage. Europe doesn't have a shortage, Europe is out. Australia has a shortage. We collectively we taxpayers have spent trillions upon trillions of dollars, from the US to Aussies to Germans to Brits, etc. Where the fuck has that been going? Because the UK ran out of artillery basically within the first couple of days, digging into reserves. Same with the other European countries, and the US, Patriot air defense interceptors, etc. Not that many of them. This is still limited. Like, imagine if China knew that our amount of arty and missiles was this low, I think shit would have happened if they knew it was this low. I know it's not historically the way that it would act, but you have Iran firing some missiles into Israel, Russia firing some into Ukraine. It's still fairly limited. It's a lot, but it's not like it's a world war with multiple major players in this, and they're running low on stuff. Firstly, I think the damage done to Israel from Iran from the missiles was actually a lot more than is being shown, and I think there was a lot more expenditure of air defence than is being talked about. But still, this is the idea that mass is the biggest problem in the Western force. And I talk about this and people push back on it, but I believe our biggest issue is nothing to do with technology. We have the most advanced tech, military tech. We just do not have the ability to have mass, okay? Now, White House Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly said in a statement, the decision was made to put America's interest first following a Department of Defense review of our nation's military support and assistance to other countries across the globe, aka Israel and themselves too. We could call it 51st state. This move comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Trump on the sidelines of the NATO summit. The US President, who has been repeatedly frustrated in recent weeks by Russian President Vladimir Putin's reticence to come to the bargaining table. Again, Trump at this did not rule out Patriot defences. Now, my initial thoughts when I saw this story was, could this be political show from Trump to Putin to show that the US is ready to negotiate? Because it's pretty hard to, the US tries to put themselves as a mediator here, but it is hard to mediate something when it's your weapons that are being fired and destroying everything as well. So it could be a bit of a show, and what we do know is within 48 hours after this decision being made, Trump is speaking to Putin. So again, this is just the first thought I had. Imagine if Iran or North Korea said they were going to mediate, people would say the exact same thing. Now, this missile defense expert, he's come out with something very relevant to this. He goes, air defense won't win a war for you, but the absence of it will lose one fast. And I fully agree with that. He pointed to Army budget documents revealing a quiet quadrupling of its requirement for Patriot interceptors, but ramping up will take some time. You can't just flip a switch. Industry across the West has been absolutely pulled apart over the last decades, and it will take a lot of time, especially in Europe. In Europe, I'm still questioning if that industry can get to the point where they would like it to, but air defense won't win a war. We know that. It is a defensive system. But if then everything starts getting hammered and far more success, especially with Russia increasing its cruise and ballistic missiles production, and it's actually increased, it's not just in the budget somewhere, and a massive increase, 5 or 10-fold on Garans as well. And then we see this, 2 hours ago my time, we'll be speaking to President Putin of Russia at 10 a.m, so a couple of hours ago now, and this is, it could be very relevant to this. It could be a bit of an olive branch being extended, but is there really interest in this? Because as I'm about to show you, I think that Russia can somewhat smell blood in the water. And I think a lot of this is coming due to huge amounts of narrative shifting, cracking, changing, whatever you would like to call it. Now, we have this from Mr. Julian Robke. Now, I've been very, very critical of Mr. Robke before for being far more of an activist over an analyst or reporter. Now, I believe that he's a very, very competent analyst and reporter, but like many are not willing to put their knowledge and their lessons learnt and apply that to Ukraine due to bias too. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect at that, but I've seen many, many incredibly competent reporters and analysts, etc., who are not willing. They will comfortably say, hey, look how bad a air defence shortage is at this country or this country or this country, but not to the same extent do it, even if in the best interest, to criticise or show Ukraine in any bad light at all. Now, what we have started to see is even the most hardcore pages, some have just completely left the internet, or are starting to share some hard truths that you and I have been speaking about for some time. And until recently, to bring up any of this would have been called Kremlin talking points. until the last couple of weeks. And we got accused of that when we spoke about the attritional nature of the war, the shortage in mass in Europe, etc., 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 changing in politics, changing of rhetoric, criticising rhetoric versus reality, and now it's become like mainstream stuff, okay? So let's have a look over this complete narrative shift. His post was in German. I've changed it into English using ChatGPT-4. So if there's anything incorrect in that, I apologise. After 2 days in Ukraine, numerous conversations, and yesterday's Trump decision, here is another short military political update. Number one, behind the facade of unity, shared values and common goals, deep divisions are emerging among the leading actors. Let's start with the Ukrainian government. It emphasises success in the Sumy region and portrays the capture of a single village as the failure of a large-scale Russian offensive, allegedly involving 50,000 soldiers. However, available footage suggests the actual number is closer to a tenth of that. We've heard about 80,000 soldiers in Kursk before that were never there. So it's about 5,000, and that it is, yes, it's massive success. Focus on that. No one's talking about, look at the thumbnails and titles on all the pages. No one's talking about the south and east falling apart, but one village in Sumy of being stabilised is now, everything's going, it's success. And trying to 10x the numbers here to make it look like a much, much larger success. That's what I will talk about. All numbers, there's a lot of numbers that might be to a factor of 10. At the same time, the continued loss of Donetsk region is barely being discussed anymore, at least not in exchanges with Western partners. In reality, the Ukrainian army is currently losing large parts of the south and is now fighting on the territory of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So now fighting on the territory. Again, these realities which have been ignored, now people are just going to either leave the internet and stop reporting, or they're going to have to eventually start reporting on it. Well, we'll see. I'll see how long some people's audiences will actually hold on to the what's the word I use? The Kool-Aid. Now, the cities of Toretsk and Chasiv Yar have effectively fallen to Russian forces without this being openly communicated. Russia is now advancing in Konstantinivka from 3 directions, a city which was still considered a central supply hub for the entire Middle Front as recently as September 24. Zelensky publicly emphasises that Germany is now Ukraine's biggest supporter. Accordingly, Ukraine is putting a friendly face towards what is in fact Germany's inadequate support, which has only slightly increased since the withdrawal of the US. Germany cannot backfill the US. Zelensky repeats the sugar-coated figures from Berlin, over 9 billion euros in military aid this year, and talks about new RST systems, air defence, statements that are being downplayed behind closed doors on the German side. The result is that between Merz and Scholz, only the tone has changed, not the structural helplessness of the German government regarding Ukraine and Russia. Now again, militarily, Germany is the most powerful nation in Europe, especially historically as well. People will point to France's industry, and I point to France's history and warfare as well. But we have a look at Germany as far as relative power too of GDP, population, and industry. Industry might be slightly below France, but they also need to keep a lot of their own equipment, but has nowhere near the industry which the US has, and is going to struggle to increase that due to energy cost, labour price, etc. Continued. Instead of acting decisively, responsibility is passed to industry, handed over to German arms manufacturers, while the government retreats the position of merely offering financial support, sending the MBDA representative instead of the requested Taurus cruise missiles is the current high point of political self-deception. And this is what we're going to talk about. Rhetoric versus reality is, we'll send these representatives here and there, rather than real action of let's give Taurus. For weeks now, senior government officials have claimed the US is on the verge of a course correction, that the Trump administration has recognised the seriousness of the situation, thanks for fucking realising, that the NATO summit showed unity. But all of this lies somewhere between wishful thinking and denial of reality. And NATO unity, that is a public showing only. In truth, the US will not impose any serious sanctions on Russia and is increasingly withdrawing its military support for Ukraine, halted the most important support. And second most important, actually, the most important support America gives Ukraine is ISR and Starlink, which I put in ISR. What has been evident since 2016 and a bit of reality since 22 continues to be met with shrugged shoulders, regarding as unfortunate but inevitable. And we do see the US, they're not going to start putting in more sanctions. We know they talk about secondary sanctions. Secondary sanctions have to be on India, an ally of the US and a country they work with very closely. What will skyrocket oil, the particles of oil that you're putting in your car in Europe, it is from Russia, it's just not refined in Russia. It's crude going to India and then India going there. Secondary sanctions, going to have big problems on that. You're also, secondary sanctions are a huge influence on someone else's sovereignty and independence as well. And then it's going to be on China too, which is going to have all sorts of problems from political to economic for America as well. His last point. Ukraine is currently losing an area of size of Berlin roughly every 2 months. And there is no realistic plan in Kyiv, Berlin, Brussels or Washington to stop the Russian advance. This is what I've spoken about multiple times. I've referred to it as the forbidden question. What if it can't be stopped? What then? The only plan that has ever been put forward relies on military victories. And what I've said is, what if that isn't possible? No, it is because of this. What if it isn't possible? What then? And as Mr. Ropke says here, Ukraine flag in his bio, I've criticised him before for releasing emotionally charged, what I'd call misinformation at best, probably more disinformation or malinformation. But even he now is saying there's nothing that's being put forward that is actually to stop this. And not only stop it, it's one thing to stop it, which is currently not possible. But Ukraine's relying on then military victory. What has to stop, you have to stabilise the situation so you could mobilise a minimum of, say, 200,000 guys for offensive actions, armed, trained, in vehicles, in whatever, to then try and push that back. And at the moment, that is impossible, in my opinion, a decade away at best. At the same time, Russian air dominance over Ukraine cities is more pronounced than ever. That's why I showed you the Korans. This is evident from the hundreds of weekly drone strikes on critical infrastructure across the country, and that will start increasing sharply as well. So my thoughts on this is we're seeing cracks in the narrative from within, and now it can't be hidden, even if you go onto your favourite YouTubers and again, their titles and thumbnails will just show Sumi or just show complete collapse. No. Anyone really assessing this at the moment is going, shit, we can't actually hide this anymore. That even the most pro-Ukrainian voices are now, they're acknowledging the battlefield losses, Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, parts of Donetsk, entry into Dnipropetrovsk. They're calling out massively inflated Ukrainian claims, 50,000 Russian troops that have been repelled in Sumy when it's more like a tenth of that. I wonder if the casualties will ever be looked at, that there's 1 million people that are gone, and still Russia's advancing everywhere, that the industry is gone, the missiles were gone in 2022, March, and still firing and moving. I wonder when those numbers are going to start being criticised. They're pointing to deliberate silence around strategic setbacks, especially towards Western partners, that no one talks about these other areas, but everything is talked about in one area that may be somewhat irrelevant to the whole thing. NATO unity is more performance than policy. You and I have criticised this heavily. It offers symbolic gestures instead of decisive support, aka rhetoric versus reality. It's symbolic of, NATO will say, Ukraine's on an irreversible path to NATO. What does that actually do? Fucking nothing. The guy at the front line would go, I don't give a shit about that performance. Let us into NATO. Or they'll say, we're going to offer more support, and then, trickle. It doesn't actually do anything. It's just performance. And that's something you and I have been incredibly critical of. And now it's starting, I guess, to actually be seen. And people are starting to acknowledge, especially in this, that the battlefield is deteriorating and has been deteriorating for some time. And what I will say is you don't know when an event horizon is crossed until you're getting squeezed out in spaghettification, until you're reaching the singularity. And I think we could be there. Now, there's been a clear shift in voices like this from bloggers, from the mainstream media, politicians, activists, analysts, everyone. There's been a clear shift. And it feels like even the most pro-Ukraine crowd is quietly prepping people for either a negotiated climb down, so they're sort of preparing for that, and starting to shift blame. The blame will be shifted to the US mainly, onto Trump, and will also be shifted onto neutral analyst voices for influencing that, I would say, or for preparing people for just a grinding retreat over a number of months or years. And this is because the reality of attrition against a much larger army starts being exploited, and the reality of how that looks is starting to come to the forefront and it's not hidden anymore, and only so much can be hidden in casualty numbers which are likely highly inflated. And that's why I showed you in the book Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann. He talks about back in World War I, there was when things were going wrong and moving backwards, all the focus in the media, I believe in the French media, went onto the casualties on the other side and saying we're having that much casualties that eventually this will stop, and all the focus went to there. Notice something similar here? Now, Mr. Tatarigami Ue, he says, with every call between Trump and Putin on peace, we move further from real peace. Putin convinces the American side that peace is near and that any escalation, including aid to Ukraine, should be avoided. And yet, in a recent call with Macron, Putin showed no interest in peace. And I agree here with Mr. Tatarigami Ue, because with these changes that we are seeing here, which of course is a representation of how many are feeling and how politicians are too, Putin, in my opinion, and his commanders, they can smell blood in the water. And why would they stop now? If they can smell blood in the water, they would like to stop to have less casualties and less expenditures, but they're not going to do it for nothing, so they'll want to step forward at minimum to those oblasts. And that's the thing, is the only way to stop this is carrot or the stick. The stick is not working, as Julian says here. The stick isn't working. No one's really prepared to do the carrot, because the carrot would be, you're still advancing, you take this, which is what I've spoken about here, that this may be preparing people for something to come. But I think Russia can smell blood in the water. They're seeing things like this and going, even if they're seeing it, that means we need to keep going because we may actually be closer. And this, I think, explains this well. And this was from Big Surge in his most recent write-up, The Russo-Ukrainian War, The Flaming Olive Branch. If anyone is surprised that Russia came to Istanbul only to reiterate the same terms they've been presenting from the beginning, they're clearly not paying attention. Russia has no inducement to soften its stance so long as it feels that the battlefield calculus is unchanged. And nothing that the West or Ukraine has done since 22 has given Moscow a valid reason to revise its views. So again, yes, there has been more cost. Russia has made battlefield mistakes, but has the calculus in the Kremlin that we will have military victories and that will influence politics? War is politics by the means, Karl von Clausewitz. Has anything really changed that calculus of thinking? No. It's been more costly, but it hasn't changed the calculus. Russia's baseline demands ought to be well understood by now, as is Russia's willingness to achieve those aims kinetically and the cost of which they are willing to lay down to achieve this. If Ukraine does not give up the Donbass at the table in Istanbul, it can be taken by the Russian army. In the end, there's very little difference. So you're saying they're not going to give it up that way. They are willing to take it kinetically. Of course, I would prefer not to. It's incredibly costly for man, machine, and economy. But still, he's saying that they can. And by what's looking like on the maps, it is looking like over a number of months or a year or two, it looks like it. Now, for the next part, speaking about Woodrow Wilson and Wilsonianism, I suggest reading, it's in the book Diplomacy by Henry Kissinger. It's either chapter 1 or 2. I suggest reading that. It'll give you a really good understanding of differences between some thinkers like Roosevelt, Wilson, even back to maybe in the following chapters we'll talk about Bismarck. You'll get a good idea of different ways of looking at politics. But it's simply the idealistic ideas that both sides could agree to peace without one side completely defeating the other one. And as we know, following then the way Wilson saw was significantly darkened by, I guess, the reality. It's almost more of a realpolitik way. We are left with Woodrow Wilson's formulation. Not, of course, his high-minded peace without victory, idealistic, which was a non-starter today, just as it was in 1917. Rather, we're left with the hardened and embittered Wilson of 1918. With the US now an active belligerent in the conflict, Wilson's outlook has darkened immensely. And now he categorically opposed negotiating with an undefeated Germany at all. That he won't do this idea of both sides will agree without defeat. He had concluded instead that, quote, if Germany was beaten, she would accept any terms. If she was not beaten, he did not wish to make terms with her, aka decisive victories. And this is where, and many are seeing, the ability for idealistic visions, real politics, real visions coming in and darkening views on things, but also where I think that Russia can smell blood in the water. And he says here, what I think sums up all of this, especially in a real politics sense, critical sense, Clausewitzian sense of politics. I think this is a great line. If the olive branch has wilted, the pistil will do. So if it won't be done politically, it will be influenced politically, militarily. So you're influencing political decisions by military means. It all comes back to that. And as Julian has criticised, as Big Serge has criticised, and I have criticised as well, these idealistic performances, rhetoric versus reality. There's been a huge gulf between these the entire time. Legends, thank you for being with me today for a little bit. My camera's about to go flat. I'll chuck everything on charge. I'll try and do daily updates the best that I can while I'm away. Look after yourselves. I'll keep you up to date with my trip, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.